Welcome to the Lost Boys to Found Fathers podcast. I'm Gabe O'Sullivan, and joining me is my co-host Will Haycox. We are men who have suffered the loss of a child, and through this production we desire to offer encouragement, strength, and hope to our fellow brothers who have traveled the same journey. Welcome, Will.
What's up, Gabe?
So this is episode 24, and at the end of episode 23, we brought up the verse of Romans 8:28. And we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to his purpose. And we talked about in that last episode how our lives have meaning, our child's lives have meaning, and now we're going to talk about how this plays out practically. And if for some reason folks are just joining this podcast like randomly and you didn't listen to the one before, we are recording outdoors today. That's why it may sound like we are in the middle of the jungle. We are actually not. It's just the beautiful area that we live in the world. Apparently there are a bazillion different kinds of birds. And so if any of you bird folks out there want to tag us on the different bird noises that you're hearing, we would be really impressed by that. And these are actual birds chirping. They are not, as ESPN does, they are not like piped in like post-production like they do on golf matches. These are for real. So okay, enough of that. Okay, Romans 8:28. And we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to his purpose. And Will, how does this play out practically in our lives every day?
Well, I think I appreciate you introing us there, Gabe. I think we've already gone over this. Probably a lot of the stuff on this podcast we're going to say similar things because we're always trying to go back to the Bible, and the Bible's consistent all the way through, so it makes sense that we're going to have some of the same themes and messages. But I think the most important thing that you can do, and it's not the easiest thing to do, it's a lot easier said than done, I guess is what I'm trying to say. But the most important thing that you can do in relation to trusting God and knowing that his will is better than ours and that he will bring things to a good outcome even if we can't see that, is to just choose to have faith in him. And that's real easy to say, like you just lost a child, your whole world's turned upside down. Just have faith, man. Just have faith and deal with it. Like that's I know that's how that can sound, and that can sound like an empty platitude to just have faith and trust that God will do what he says, but it's really that simple. And again, Gabe's talked about the things he went through when he lost his girls and the struggles of trusting God, being angry with God, and I felt the same thing and questioned God's goodness and his love and his promises to us. But it really comes down to making a choice, as most everything does when you're human and you go through the world as we do, that when you're tempted to despair and believe that your child lived for nothing, you can just say a silent prayer and say, Lord, thank you for the blessings that you've given me. You know how I'm feeling right now. You know that I'm depressed over losing my child, or I'm frustrated with my wife because we're grieving differently. Whatever the situation is, help me to trust you and to be able to give you the things that I can't handle. And I think I want to reference this multiple times, but I think I get it mixed up. Is it a man that came to Jesus that asked his son to be healed or his daughter to be healed, where he says something to Jesus, and I should have looked this up before I brought it up, but it just came in my head. But where Jesus, he approaches Jesus, says, I believe you can heal my child, and Jesus senses his thoughts and says to him, do you believe? And he's like, I believe, help my unbelief. And again, Gabe, maybe the particulars of that story, but that's something I go back to a lot, that God doesn't expect and doesn't require perfect faith and perfect belief. He just wants us to want to trust him and to come to him and let him do the hard work of actually changing our minds. But that's something that I do, and I've talked about in relation to how I deal with sin and temptation, that it's not like a foolproof thing. It's not a a magic formula that automatically makes your pain and your temptation and your frustrated feelings or depression go away, but just stopping what you're doing and just saying silent prayer, like, Lord, help me through this. And I think that is the most important thing that you can do to trust God and rest in his plan, is to just make that choice, and that will create the mindset where you are like constantly coming to him and saying, Lord, I can't do this. Help me through talking to this person that I haven't talked to since I lost my child, and I know that's going to come up and I'm just uncomfortable. Or, Lord, I can't relate to my wife right now because she's grieving in a different way than I am. Help me to be compassionate, or to be able to explain how I feel, or whatever it is. And I think that's a important thing that we need to do, is just to make that a daily habit, to lay down our good things and our bad things to God, and to let him use us and work in our hearts. And I think it's important to be willing to let him work in your heart.
Man, I would say I totally agree with that, and I would like to also add in that, and I think you're going to touch on this in a minute, but like praying that prayer to ask God to help us, to help our unbelief, to help our faith develop, to get stronger. And then also, like, God, how can you use this not only to bring me closer to you, to make me a better, more faithful servant, but how can you use my child's life and this experience to impact others' lives? Like, we have to look at this situation as a building block. Mm-hmm. For instance, you're in first grade and you're learning how to add, numbers together. 1 + 1 = 2. Well, is that the be all end all for your math skills? No, that's the building block, so that when you're a senior in high school, you can, after having all these building blocks, do calculus, right? And then what's the reason for calculus?
Maybe you can do calculus. I couldn't do calculus.
Well, what's the reason for calculus? I don't know. I still hadn't figured that out myself. I've never used it again in my life after taking the AP test in high school 20-something years ago. Mm-hmm. But for some people, the point in calculus is because then they go on to be, engineers or whatever the case may be. Like, we go through things in life because there is a greater purpose for those building blocks of those circumstances, or of those issues, or of those challenges, or of those trials, that we're going through. And it's not like right now in the midst of suffering, you can just be like, God, show me the end game here, because it's just not going to happen like that. Like, we are finite. He is not, right? Mm-hmm. Like, we have an ending. God does not. Like, we can only see what we can see. We cannot see the future. We don't see how this thing's going to play out. So that's where the faith comes in. God, help me to have faith right now to trust you in today, because I know that you have a future, that you're going to use this for some great purpose. And so we have to have that faith in God that he's going to get us through that, but then also that faith that there is something down the road where this experience, this life of this child is going to make a difference in some way, shape, form, or capacity. And so we need to go to approach God each day with the ask of him, of, Lord, help me to have faith as I go through each day, to believe that you are, that you have this situation under control.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think we can go forward from there, and we can look at how God's using the life and death of your child to teach you about him, to change your life to better serve and honor him. And I look at like the practical thing for me that I've mentioned before, that when I got into that altercation with someone else 8 months before Gabriel was born, and that was the worst thing at the time that ever happened to me, and it caused a lot of problems in the family, and I got injured and all of that. But God used that terrible thing and that frustrating thing, that thing that could have been much more serious than it was, to draw me closer to him and to change me and show me that I needed him, and that prepared me for being able to trust him when we lost Gabriel. And so the same way, you can practically help yourself trust God by searching your heart and your mind and see like I know that I was changed by the life of Gabriel, and that his life mattered and his life changed me, because my perspective on God changed, my perspective on life, my perspective on love and what love meant and how love plays out. God gave me greater patience and compassion for others that it kind of I guess I just turned 30 last week, and so I'm not that old, but I guess I'm old enough to, if you read my Facebook post, I'm old enough to ramble on about quote unquote more important things than just daily life. But I know who I was, how I was when I was growing up. When I was a teenager, I was a rebellious kid. It was very easy for me to get caught up in like what was important to me was the most important thing, and what wasn't important to me or what I thought was stupid, and you were dumb or stupid for focusing so much of your time on that. And like sorry to people who love art and like fine art or even abstract art. Let's not go into abstract art. I'll lose some listeners. But my wife and I have kind of gone back and forth as to like, I didn't appreciate like abstract art. I'm like, that's just a blue square with a squiggly line beside it. Like, okay, who cares? That's like something that in the past I could be very dismissive of. Just, this art is dumb. It's not art. Or like a 3-year-old could do this, whatever. So that's a bad example. Sorry, Gabe. But that's a thing where in the past I could be very dismissive of like, I don't see the value of this art, and so there is no value to this art. And through the life of Gabriel and for the way that the Lord's worked in my heart, he's given me the patience and the perspective to step back. And again, it's a bad example, I apologize, but to step back and be like, hey, so this blue circle and this squiggly line beside it, like to someone that might be the way they see whatever, like the relationship between them and their child, that how those two things play off each other, means something to them. And so I'm just saying I was changed, and it deepened my relationship with the Lord, and it deepened my relationship with my wife. It drew us closer to each other when we lost our son, made us realize we need to rely on each other to get through it. And having our son gave me the strength and wisdom to serve God, and gave me the experience to be able to serve him through doing this podcast with Gabe, and hopefully serve in other areas in the future. And that's something that wouldn't have been possible without our son being born and our son dying as early as he did. And so that's something that I would encourage you to do if you're struggling with this. Did my child's life have meaning? Is to search for that. And I don't know, Gabe, if you went through something similar, but just be aware that God can be using the life of your child to make you, to perfect you, to make you a better servant of him, and to make you more useful in ministry to others.
Yeah, and I love your example there. I don't think it was a dumb example about the art, because what you're saying is that it gave you this, going through this gave you the opportunity to step back and look at other people and what they're going through, and have more compassion, that to them, whatever it is that they're going through, it is a big deal. Mm-hmm. Right? And where before you may have just like blown it off, like, and I'll use an example of that, like personally, like how did God, one way that God kind of grew me through our experience was that, I'm a chiropractor, so patients come into me every day, how you doing? And that's what I'll ask them, right? How you feeling? Well, they're going to tell me how they're feeling, because that's why I'm asking them, right? So, hey, my neck hurts, my back hurts, whatever. I got sciatic, I got headaches, this and that. As I say that, Will's over there popping his neck, like turning him side to side.
You talk about necks, and I'm like, oh, how does mine feel?
Yeah, right. Mm-hmm. And so, what is happening was after that, or even when our girls were still in the hospital, and I'm back at work, and we, Vivian and Sophia were still alive, is people were coming in and they were telling me, all their ailments and whatnot. And man, I was just like, I do not care. Like, that's what I'm thinking. I'm like, I have buried a child last week. I have 2 more in the hospital fighting for their lives. I really could care less that your back hurts right now. Like, and so that's the way I felt for many months. Okay, it was really difficult to have that compassion, or people will come in and say something, like, I don't know, like, oh, today, my boss was, mean to me or whatever, or I didn't get the raise that I expected I should get. People tell you stuff. It's like when you're a chiropractor, you're also a counselor and a therapist, because folks, a lot of times their pain is tied to their emotional stuff they're going through. And so I think God used that time to remind me that, hey man, like, your life is not just about you. Your life is not just about how you are feeling, or about whether you're getting the feel goods from your current circumstances that you're in the middle of. Like, I have placed you here to be a blessing to others, not for you to be looking for how those patients, can be a blessing to you. So even though you're in the middle of this difficult time, you got to suck it up, and you got to put your life on the line for these other people, because they're the ones that are coming to you for the help. You're not supposed to be looking to them for any kind of help, or peace, or patience, or any kind of feel good, so to speak. And so God used this as a time to humble me, and to realize that, man, in what I'm doing, that my life is not about me. My life is about serving others. And that being said, I think that we can all learn that lesson from a situation as tragic as we're talking about here, because what we have is the opportunity for God to strip us down, and to humble us, and to realize that, again, life is not just about us. Life is about how can we be a servant to others. And that's hard when you're suffering, and when you're in the middle of a struggle, and when you're in the middle of loss, and when you're in the middle of grief. However, I think having that perspective gives us the opportunity to actually wake up each day and put one foot in front of the other one as we step throughout our day, realizing that, you know what, it's a much greater thing to have our lives laid out and purposed for the benefit of others, than just to live a life thinking that our life is just for our pleasure, or for our purposes, because that really, I think, just leads to emptiness, and it leads to you just seeking that next good thing, or that next pleasure. And so that was a long explanation to say that going through a circumstance like we're talking about here, we have the opportunity to learn how to be more empathetic towards others. And it is a good thing that we are more empathetic towards others, because it gets the focus off of ourselves and onto them. And that's good, because that actually ends up biochemically helping us out. It's like when folks are going through a period of depression, one of the things that counselors will tell them is, hey, you know what? Let's set you up to go down to let's say to the homeless shelter this weekend and cook breakfast for the homeless people. Or, you know what? Let's get you over to the food pantry and let you, organize, stock shelves, or give out food. Like, let's get you over to the children's shelter and let you, clean their bathrooms for the week, or like go play dodgeball with these kids that don't have parents, or whose parents are locked up. Like, and doing those good things ends up helping take the focus off the person's depressive state or situation, and it's putting it on somebody else, which in turn ends up building that depressed person up and gets them out of that depression when you're getting the focus off yourself.
Yeah, it came to mind there when when you were talking about how life isn't always about us, and even in our struggles, like, obviously, yes, like we can come to the Lord when we're crushed and defeated. We can have that time of rest and refuge and trust Him. But life doesn't revolve around us, and yeah, sometimes we are called to serve others even in the midst of our suffering. And if you're a Christian, if you've ever read the Bible, you're probably familiar with Paul, that's his story, that he was being persecuted. At one point he was stoned to death and drug outside the city, and I guess it doesn't specifically say he died, but the assumption is kind of that he died or he was near death, and God healed him, and so he walks back into the city and proclaims Christ again. And he says at one point that to live is Christ and to die is gain, and that came into my mind when you were talking there a minute ago, Gabe, because he says, like, for me, like, my desire is to die and to go be with Christ and to be reunited with my Savior, because my life has been hard and because it's better to be with Christ and to be in heaven and to experience that than it is to be here on this earth with all the pains and the sufferings. But to say to live is Christ, he's saying, he's identifying and admitting that his life here on earth isn't about him, isn't about his peace and his comfort. It's about being a servant of Christ and serving others and loving others and giving everything to other people, even when you're suffering and life isn't easy for you. And I say this, and it's true of me too. I'm nowhere near the servant or the giver of myself as Paul, but I think that's an easy thing in our culture to ignore or forget. That I know I've been guilty of, like, my wife and I, whether it's going on a mission trip or helping locally or whatever it is, like, when you're going through something tough, you don't want to go and help other people. Like, you don't want to, like you say, you don't want to go to the soup kitchen. You almost feel like, I had a rough week, I had a rough month, this bad thing just happened, whatever, like, I just lost my job. I just don't have it in me to go and serve. And you almost feel like you're justified in not serving and loving and giving of yourself because you've had a rough time. And I guess that's, like I say, it's a human thing, but it's also our culture is so self-focused. So that's not exactly where we were going there, but I thought of that when you mentioned that, Gabe, that Paul is a perfect example of someone who knew it was better for him to go and to be with Christ, but he was willing to put up with and go through whatever suffering the Lord felt was necessary so that he could continue to minister to and build up the body around him. And I think that we should be aware of that and try to do the same. So through that, another thing that you might do is to you may be able to be led to doing some ministry, whether you're starting a nonprofit. A guy that I've talked to through this podcast, I don't know if he's comfortable with me putting his name out there, so I'm not going to do it without asking him. But he's got a ministry here in Spartanburg called 2x2 Ministries that he started in relation to losing his son, and it's a ministry to feed the homeless here in Spartanburg, South Carolina. And it's something that he was moved to do by the Lord, and I think that's obviously a great thing that the Lord honors. And if you're interested in that, check out 2x2 Ministries and see if you can support him in whatever way you can. And also, we talked about in episode 12, Mr. Steve Grant told us about the loss of his sons, Chris and Kelly, and how he has been moved by the Lord to use their lives and their experience of dealing with drug abuse to try to help others come out of that and to show them that there is life and there's hope outside of drugs. But you may feel, and this is something that unfortunately is probably the case for some of you listening, that you're just destroyed and that your marriage and your family isn't dealing with this loss well, and that you feel broken, you feel like you can't respond in any of the ways we've just talked about. You can't trust God, or you're angry at God like we've talked about, and that you just feel like you're stuck. And whatever it is, we've talked about, you need to be on the same page with your wife, and maybe that's not the case for you. Maybe you were already struggling in your relationship, and then you lost a child, and so you're estranged from each other, or you're still living in the same home, but you're emotionally estranged. And we'll probably try to have some podcasts and maybe even have a counselor from our church come and talk about that and what to do at that point. But I would just say, if this is the case, reach out to Gabe and I. We want to pray with you. We want to encourage you in whatever way we can, even though we're not experts in dealing with that situation. But I would just encourage you to fall at the feet of the Lord and to beg him to heal you and to give you the ability to surrender your hurt and your hopelessness to him, and that he would give you forgiveness. And if it's you that has been the chief doer of wrong in the situation, that he would give you the humility to ask for repentance. And God is the author and object of all of our hope, so we must seek to trust that he'll work things for our good and his glory, even when things look bleak in your marriage or just in your life in general. So that's a thing we haven't really touched on much in this, but I just felt that was worth mentioning, that I know there are some of you out there that aren't at this kind of middle ground where you can choose one way or the other, that maybe you already, before you found this podcast or just, whatever, you're dealing with this loss of your child, and you and your wife aren't on the same page, and it's just tearing your marriage and your family apart. So Gabe and I pray for you if that's the case, and we're hopeful that the Lord can turn that around, but we just encourage you to turn yourself over to the Lord and let him work in your heart, and to try to make you receptive to him, and just to do your best to love and to show patience and repentance in that situation. We've got some other more practical things here that we may cover in the next episode. What are we coming up on, 30 minutes here, Gabe?
Yeah.
But we just appreciate you guys listening again. I think we said this is episode 24, so it's pretty neat that we're this far, and that the Lord has given us this much to say. Although I guess if you know me in person, and Gabe too, you went on a nice little rant there in the middle of this podcast. So I'm encouraged that I'm not the only person that can talk for 5 to 10 minutes straight. But yeah, this is great. We love working with you guys, and we pray for you, and we just pray that whatever your situation, wherever you are and dealing with the loss of your child, that ultimately you would do what we just counseled these people to do who are in a bad situation, and just trust the Lord, that you would just fall down before him and beg him to heal you and to draw you closer to him. Do you have anything you want to add to wrap us up, Gabe?
I think that's great. I think that puts a nice bow on this episode, Will. Thank you for that. And just make sure that you're tuning in for episode 25, and we will continue with this thought process about the meaning of life, the meaning of your life, the meaning of your child's life, and why we can actually find comfort and find purpose even through times of difficulty such as you are experiencing. So thank y'all so much for joining us today. Make sure you follow Lost Boys to Found Fathers on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You can also search for my book on Amazon, Thy Will Be Done. Put a question mark at the end of that. My name is Gabriel O'Sullivan. Let's not be lost. Let's be found in him.